of the elements of every single TV show, movie that you've ever seen, doesn't matter what it is, that you probably don't think much about, is the characters that are always in the background. There are all kinds of little supporting characters that are just kind of there to kind of help drive the plot forward. You're not really focused on them. You're too focused on the lead actor or actress or whatever kind of movie it is that you're watching. But these background supporting roles can sometimes have really important moments. Whether it's the best friend that says something in some way that makes the lead actor realize that he's actually in love with the lead actress and he's got to rush and go do whatever he can. It's the same ending to every single romantic comedy there's ever been or ever will be, and most every single Hallmark movie as well. I'm sorry if I ruined an entire genre for you. They all end the same. But that's how it goes. It could be the mother of the main female character who comforts her and reminds her that she doesn't need any man to get to where she needs to go in her life, to be a success. It could even be just the person who's in the same coffee shop who says, "Hey, could you pass the sugar?" And for some reason that phrase is what leads our lead detective into discovering who the murderer truly is. These are kind of small roles, and yet they are so important to driving the plot forward. And yet, in a lot of different cases throughout television and movies and all sorts of other things, sometimes these supporting roles, the actors or actresses portraying them, are just so good at their job that they wind up being the thing that you remember most. They become kind of the center stage. They kind of overshadow the main character and kind of get in the way of what's going on there. It's happened over and over again throughout television, movies, different things of these sorts of things. Let me give you some examples. When George Lucas was first doing the casting portion of the original Star Wars movie, he said he always envisioned Han Solo as being an important character, but mostly just because he was supposed to be the transport that would take Luke and Obi-Wan to get to the Death Star. It was kind of just never really meant to be that important. He was supposed to have an interesting backstory, but in the further movies he would have some supporting role, but it wouldn't be nearly as important to him. But George was having a really hard time in casting his Han Solo. He auditioned several different actors to try to come into this, and it wasn't until, as they were beginning rehearsals, they needed to find somebody. They needed at least somebody who could come and read lines. And he had heard that one of the carpenters who was working on the set that day had actually tried to be an actor several times, but never really could get a role for him. So he asked young Harrison Ford if he wouldn't mind coming in and reading the lines of Han for them. And as George watched these rehearsals take place, he realized that in this shaggy-looking carpenter, he had found his Han Solo. When the movie came out, Han Solo, Harrison Ford himself did such an amazing job that as the movies went forward, George decided to make Han much more of a lead character. And in fact, it would go on to the point that when the Star Wars movies had concluded, you know this and I know this, out of all of the actors involved with Star Wars, Harrison Ford had the most successful career. I always like to say that, Harrison Ford wakes up in the morning, he looks at himself in the mirror and goes, I'm Harrison Ford. Mark Hamill, who played Luke, wakes up in the morning, looks in the mirror and goes, dang it, I'm Mark Hamill. This is also happened in other places. When Hannibal Lecter was created as a character, he was an important element to driving the plot forward. He was kind of necessary to be in there, but it was supposed to be a movie that was focused on our lead actress, Clarice. She was supposed to be the star. That's why they cast Jodie Foster, who at that point in time had done several really important movies, and they wanted her to be just kind of center stage here. But when the credits rolled at the end of Silence of the Lambs, not a single person was talking about Jodie Foster. She did a great job. Every single person who's ever seen that movie walks away thinking of one thing and one thing only, and that's how creepy Anthony Hopkins really is. I genuinely like to believe the dude is just a nice guy who just gets cast as this really creepy dude all the time because he's really good at it. But if you met him in public, I'm sure he'd probably be pretty polite to you. I don't think he'd try to eat your face, but... When MASH was being adapted into television, actor Wayne Rogers was told that the creators envisioned this as an ensemble comedy, but that the focal point of it would be a shared spotlight between the characters of Hawkeye and Wayne Rogers' character, Trapper John. But when the film started rolling, it became pretty clear to everybody there that Alan Alda just had a certain quality about him. That man had a delivery, an ability to go from laugh out loud hilarious to unbelievably heartbreaking and emotional at the drop of a hat. Wayne quickly realized as the first season was going on that more and more the writers seemed to be giving Hawkeye some of the best lines and some of the best story arcs. And by season 2, he realized that it was not a shared spotlight, that he had become the supporting character, the background player who sometimes might be involved in the main story, but not very often. And so when his contract ran out at the end of season 3, Wayne Rogers made the choice to not go forward with the rest of the series. He had been relegated into the background. Finally, when Chris Pratt was brought in for the show Parks and Recreation, oh, I love that show so very much. But originally, Chris Pratt was only supposed to be a short run in the first season. He was only supposed to have a handful of episodes. He was going to get dumped by Anne, and that was going to be it. He was going to fade into obscurity. But Chris Pratt was just so charming and so likable and so funny that they kept him around throughout the entire series run, making him part of the main cast and making a lot of storylines focus solely on him. This would wind up being a star-making performance for Chris Pratt, and he would go on to be the mega superstar that he is today. I don't think there's a movie out right now that doesn't have Chris Pratt involved in some way, shape, or form. He's in everything, almost to the point of I'm getting tired of seeing his pretty face. Sometimes these background characters, they just become so important, they just take center stage that they end up becoming the main story, that they end up becoming the focal point, and the person who was meant to be in the front and center just kind of takes a background role. It's not necessarily intended, but it just sort of happens. And in fact, I think Samuel kind of understands what this is about for us, because while Samuel has 2 books that are based entirely around him, that 2 books that bear his name, he plays a background role for most of it. In fact, I can prove this to you, that Samuel himself actually dies in 1 Samuel chapter 25, and the narrative keeps going, and nobody seems to notice. In fact, there's a whole other book called 2 Samuel that Samuel ain't in. That would be like if I all of a sudden started writing a biography about the life of Teddy Roosevelt, and just after his daughter Alice was born, I decided to shift entirely and focus solely on Alice Roosevelt. If you don't know anything about Alice Roosevelt, please do yourself a favor and look her up. That girl was awesome. In fact, there's a quote from Teddy Roosevelt that I'm actually going to read for you because I love it. It's fantastic. Here's how unique his daughter was. Teddy once said, "I can do one of 2 things. I can be president of the United States, or I can attend to Alice. I can't possibly do both." I think I would have, tried to marry her if I'd have been alive at that point in time. She's awesome. She once actually, her husband ran for political office, and she threw all of her support publicly for his opponent. She was banned from the White House twice in her lifetime. I'd like to get to know her a little bit more. So anyway, even though Samuel did a lot of really great things, even though Samuel as a prophet of God did some incredible stuff in his lifetime, most of the time he's relegated towards the background. And this would actually be true of the very first narrative of the life of Samuel, because the story in Samuel chapter 1, our text for today, is not really about him. He's an important piece, to be sure. He's kind of why this story gets told in the first place, but the narrative does not focus on him. Instead, the narrative of 1 Samuel chapter 1 focuses on his mother, Hannah. Hannah lived in the hill country of Ephraim in a small town named Ramath Zophim. Say that 3 times fast. I'll wait. It's a hill country. It's 15 miles away from Shiloh, which Shiloh was an important town in the history of the nation of Israel because Shiloh was actually considered to be the first capital of the nation of Israel. We don't talk a lot about Shiloh because eventually when King David is made king, he makes Jerusalem the new capital, and all of a sudden everything talks about Jerusalem. But Shiloh was the nation's capital. It was where the house of the Lord was located. And so them being 15 miles away from Shiloh, that's close enough that her family every year would make a trek to Shiloh to go and worship and sacrifice at the house of the Lord. Shiloh was an important town, but it kind of gets, again, relegated into the background after this. Hannah lived there with her husband, a man named Elkanah, and his other wife, a woman named Peninnah. And in this particular situation, we learn something very early on that would be very easy for us to kind of gloss over and move past, but it gives us some information that is going to become really important very shortly thereafter. Because verse 2, towards the end, it says, Peninnah had children, but Hannah was childless. It's here that I want to take a moment to remind you of something that maybe you knew, maybe you didn't know, I don't know. But at this particular time and in this particular culture, from the time that they could understand that thought, girls were raised to believe that their value, not just as wives, but as people in general, came from their ability to give their husband children. They were taught from the time that they were little how to run a household, how to best raise kids. In fact, the older girls would oftentimes take the responsibility of raising their younger siblings to help out around the household. It was good training for them, so that way when they became a wife, they could give their husband all kinds of kids, and they could raise them best. Now, in our culture, in our society today, a woman going without children, it's not necessarily uncommon. We know that it could be one of two different things. Either she had a medical issue of some kind that has prevented her from being able to have kids herself, or she simply made the choice not to have children. That's, again, not uncommon, but in this time period, for a woman to go completely without children whatsoever, for her to not have the ability to give her husband children, it would just absolutely devastate her. So verse 2, revealing to us that Peninnah had children, but Hannah was childless, speaks volume about her frame of mind already before we really get to know much about her. She was probably looked down upon from everybody in her town, that everybody in her family even looked down upon her. She likely wrestled a lot with self-esteem issues and self-worth issues. Because culturally, the stigma was that her responsibility as a wife was to give kids for her husband. Elkanah, though, her husband, doesn't actually seem to be too bothered by the idea that Hannah can't have kids for him. He does everything that he possibly can to be a good husband, to show love to his wife, even blatantly showcasing that Hannah, of the two wives, is the favorite, the one that he actually cares for. Verses 4 and 5 show this when it says, whenever Elkanah offered a sacrifice, he always gave portions of the meat to his wife Peninnah and each of her sons and daughters, but he gave a double portion to Hannah. For he loved her, and this showcases, again, where we're at culturally, he loved her even though the Lord kept her from conceiving. Oftentimes in this particular time period, it wasn't uncommon for husbands to just straight up divorce their wives if they couldn't give them a kid. So the text is pointing out to us that culturally this is a big deal, that Hannah cannot have children of her own. So let's take a look at this whole situation. We've got Hannah, who's living with a husband who absolutely adores her, even though she's not been able to do the one thing that she was raised as a kid to believe that she had to do. But he's also married to another gal who seems to be popping out kids left and right. She's able to give her husband the one thing that Hannah is seemingly unable to do. Yeah, her husband adores her. Yeah, he cares a great deal for her. And yeah, he doesn't seem to be too bothered by the fact that she can't give him kids. But when he brings in this second wife and they start having kids left and right, then Hannah has to know it's not Elkanah's fault that she can't have kids. Even to this day, women who struggle with fertility issues, who are actively trying to have children, when they come to the realization that for whatever reason their bodies just don't seem to be able to do it, it weighs heavy on them. A few weeks ago we celebrated Mother's Day, which is an awesome holiday to celebrate our moms, but for a lot of women, it seems to be a reminder of what they're unable to do. Hannah knew what that was like. She knew what it meant month after month, trying and hoping, only to be found that yet again she was unable to do what she needed to do. The husband loves the one who cannot have the kids more than the other. And I'm going to go out on a limb that because of that, it doesn't mean that Peninnah and Hannah were total besties. Living in the same household, one who's able to produce children, one who can't, one who the husband loves even though she can't produce children, and the other one who's just kind of there to fill in the space. In fact, we learn more about Peninnah and Hannah's relationship in just the next verses 6 and 7. It gives us a clear picture of that relationship. It reads, her rival. That's a fun word to start off with, right, to describe this relationship. Her rival would taunt her severely just to provoke her. Ladies in this room, you've never done anything just to provoke somebody, right? Married men in the room, shut up. Because the Lord had kept Hannah from conceiving, year after year when she went to the Lord's house, her rival taunted her in this way. And we get to see Hannah's reaction to this. Hannah would weep and would not eat. It devastated Hannah that she was unable to do what her rival was able to do so easily. All Hannah wanted to do when she first got married to Elkanah was to hear the pitter-patter of little feet running around the house. And when she finally did hear that sound, she knew it wasn't from her. And to make matters worse, Elkanah's other wife, the wife who was around all the time, would just throw it in her face over and over again, likely calling her a failure, likely saying that there must be something wrong with her, likely saying she has let Elkanah down. And while Elkanah may say that he loves Hannah, he can't possibly love her the way that he loves Peninnah. She feels a tremendous amount of shame, and she wants more than anything else in the world to give Elkanah a child. She is so tired of the shame. She's so tired of the taunting. She is so tired of everything. All she wants is finally to hold a baby of her own in her arms. In one instance, while they're back at Shiloh, again, there to worship and give sacrifice at the house of the Lord. Again, this is the meeting place of all Israel, and we can't call it the temple because we're still a few generations removed from when King Solomon would be the one to build the temple. And in fact, right now we don't actually have a king in Israel, but more on that later. Hannah goes into the house of the Lord, and she begins to weep. Probably not even making it past the door frame before she can't contain it anymore. She weeps and she prays, and while she's asking God to give her a child, a prayer that I'm certain that she has prayed over and over and over and over again, in the midst of this prayer, she makes a promise to God that we see laid out for us in verse 11. She says, making a vow, she pleaded, Lord of armies, if you will take notice of your servant's affliction, remember and not forget me, and give your servant a son, I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and his hair will not be cut. She is so desperate for a child that she promises, she makes an oath to God himself that if he gives her a son, she will gladly put him in service to God. If God would simply give her the gift that she's been waiting for her entire life, she will gladly give that gift back to God for him to use how he sees fit. But Hannah's not alone here. She's in the house of the Lord. She's praying this prayer that, again, she's probably prayed several times, but the house of the Lord is currently being overseen by a priest by the name of Eli. And we're going to be finding this out in the next couple of weeks, but Eli's not the greatest priest. In fact, Eli is there, he sees Hannah praying, and as she's praying, she's just kind of moving her lips. She's mouthing the words that she is praying in her heart. It's something that I'm sure you've probably done several times. I know I have. Helps to kind of keep me focused in my prayer life if I can just at least mouth the words that are going out in my prayer. But when Eli sees Hannah doing this, he assumes something nefarious is going on, something different is happening. It says at the end of verse 13 and on into 14, it says, Eli thought she was drunk and said to her, how long are you going to be drunk? Get rid of your wine. Truly a wonderful man of God. I can't imagine for the life of me that Hannah is the first person who's ever come in and mouthed her prayers as she's praying to God. Does that mean that Eli assumes that everyone in the nation of Israel is an alcoholic? This is such an odd thing for a priest to think, that this woman has come in here and that she's drunk out of her mind, and for some reason that's causing her to mouth different words. And so we accuse her of this drunkenness. But Hannah explains to him that no, she's not drunk, she is just heartbroken. And that as she's done 1,000 times beforehand, she is pleading with God. And when Eli hears about this, he responds in verse 17, saying, "Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant the request you've made of him." I don't know about you, but this is an awfully quick turnaround, right? One moment, Eli's accusing her of drunkenness in the temple of God, or in the house of the Lord, excuse me. The next moment, he's saying, "Oh, go in peace, my child. May the Lord grant you as you wish." I can't help but maybe doubt his sincerity there. And I don't know, maybe it's just my brain. Maybe you've never thought about this before, but to me, this kind of sounds like a priestly way of saying, "You're weird, please leave." And yet something in what Eli says, something about the words that he uses, whether he meant them or not, it changes something for Hannah. Something about the way that Eli has said that particular phrase to her has given her something that she has not felt in a very, very long time. Hope. Because we see that. In the end of verse 18, we find out that Hannah went on her way. She ate and no longer looked despondent. Something about this time is different. She's prayed this prayer more times than she could ever possibly care to recall. And each and every time she is left wondering, is this actually going to happen? Is God finally going to do it this time? And yet, for some reason, this time, Hannah's at peace. Something about this encounter with Eli, and Eli saying that God will bless her in the midst of this. And again, I don't know if Eli was sincere in this moment or not, but something about that has instilled upon her hope that sometime, somehow, some way, this is going to be different. That hope would turn out to be rather justified, because we find out in verse 20, it says, "After some time, Hannah conceived." That's a pretty powerful phrase just right there, isn't it? To know the desperation of what she's gone through, to know the kind of life that she's had to live because of this shame, to hear that she's finally conceived. But it goes on, and she gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel because she said, "I requested him from the Lord." As she holds her baby in her arms, the thing that she has longed for, the thing that she has pleaded with God for, the thing that she has just wanted so desperately for so long, as she finally holds the gift of God himself in her arms, she gives him the most appropriate name possible. The name Samuel actually means requested from God. Hannah knows what a gift it is that she's holding in her arms right now. And more importantly, she knows who this gift came from. And even though she's been given this amazing gift of God, even though she knows where this gift's come from, it would probably have been so easy for her to just forget about the pain that she had felt. And by extension, she probably could have forgotten all about the promise that she made. I mean, how often do we do that? Maybe when you were a kid and you were in school and your teacher handed out a test that you weren't ready for, maybe you said something like, I probably said a couple times, "God, if you can just help me pass this test, I'll go be a missionary for you in Africa." Last I checked, this ain't Africa. You've probably made a similar promise to God at some point in time in your life, and yet when that thing transpires, when that thing happens, and it happens, maybe you said, "Hey, God, I don't think I could make that promise happen." It would have been so easy for Hannah in the midst of this, having that gift, that child that she's always wanted, the thing that she has longed for in her heart for so very long. It would have been so easy for her to say, no, he's mine now. And to keep her son close to her chest at all possible times. But Hannah is intent to actually follow through on her promise to God. She knows the gift that is in her arms right now is from God. That God has held up his end of this bargain. And she feels convicted in such a way to hold up her end, to make sure that this gift is used in service to the God from which it came from. There's always an element to this particular story that I don't think we talk much about, but I think is kind of important, right? Again, the narrative is so focused on Hannah in the midst of all this that it is kind of easy to forget about those background characters, but I found myself wondering, what did her husband have to say about all this? About the idea that his son is going to be given to someone else. But we actually find out that Elkanah is relatively on board with this notion. When they're getting ready to head to Shiloh again as a family, sometime afterwards, Hannah tells him that she's going to stay behind with Samuel because when he is weaned, she's going to take him to the temple to serve God permanently. And Elkanah responds in verse 23 saying, "Do what you think is best. Stay here until you've weaned him, and may the Lord confirm your word." This kind of makes sense with what little we do know about Elkanah, that he would be supportive of this in this moment, right? I mean, for so many years, he has given her that double portion. He has done everything that he can to show Hannah that he loves her, that he cherishes her more than his other wife. And so when she tells him that she's going to do this difficult thing of giving the gift of God back in service to God, Elkanah can't do anything but support her again. To reaffirm his love for his wife and tell her that the Lord may confirm her word. When the time finally comes, when Samuel has been fully weaned, and I did a little digging to try to figure this out, like how old would Samuel have been to be weaned at this particular portion? And I found different conflicting notions. Some said he was as young as 22 months, not quite 2 years old. Some had him as old as 9. That's a long time. But the most consistent number that I saw, the most consistent age that a lot of biblical scholars seem to agree on was that Samuel was at least 3 years old. For 3 years, Hannah has been able to hold on to this gift of God. 3 short years that Samuel has been with her. And she finally brings him to the temple at Shiloh, to the house of the Lord, the meeting place of all of Israel. She takes this son, this beautiful gift of God, and she finds Eli there again and tells him what we see in verses 26 through 28. "Please, my Lord," she said, "as surely as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. I prayed for this boy. And since the Lord gave me what I asked him for, I now give the boy to the Lord. For as long as he lives, he is given to the Lord." Then he worshiped the Lord there. 2 things kind of stand out to me here. How hard do you think this was for Hannah? How difficult must it have been for her to stand there holding the hand of her, we think, 3-year-old son? The thing that she prayed for, the thing that she longed for, the thing that she cried for. How difficult was it to take his hand and put it in Eli's? The second thing, what's Eli thinking here? Imagine being Eli for a second, right? I mean, a couple of years ago, you saw this lady. She was praying to herself. You thought she was so hysterical that maybe she was drunk, and now she's handing you her kid, saying, you raise him. I love all of you. Please don't do that to me. But this is a huge and emotional moment for Hannah because she is taking this gift that has come from God. She could have kept him to herself. She could have kept him by her side. She could have made him just hers. And instead, she knows that the best use of this gift of God, the best thing that she could possibly do, is to give this gift back to God. To know that he is going to have an impact on generations to come. She has no idea the impact that her son is going to have. And the major historical events in the nation's history of Israel that he is going to be a part of, if not the front runner of. But all she can do in this moment is to know that the best use of her gift that God has given her is to give it back in service to God. To know that God will do incredible things with it. Each and every one of us have been given gifts from God himself. Maybe in your instance, it's not quite as dramatic as Hannah, but you've been given a gift from God. Maybe you didn't have to struggle for it. Maybe you didn't have to work for it. But each one of us has been blessed by God with a variety of different gifts and talents and abilities. Maybe you're gifted with the ability to make music. Maybe you're incredibly good at organization. Maybe you got an eye for decoration. Maybe you're really good with technology. Maybe you're good at building and fixing different things. Or maybe you're not good at any of that, but for some reason you have the gift of making money. I really wish you could share that gift with me. Whatever your gift or talent or ability or anything that is, understand that it is given to you by God. And the absolute best thing that you could possibly do with that gift that comes from God is to use it in service to God. That gift that you've been given can be used to help further the kingdom of God. No matter what it is, no matter how obscure it may seem, in some way, shape, or form, it can be used by God. God has done some incredible things with some of the most unlikely of gifts. I wish I could remember the name of the organization. I can't remember it off the top of my head right now. But several years back, there was a young man, 9 years old, who had heard about these different third world countries that were struggling to get water. And so he thought about, what can I possibly do to help out with this? What could I do? What are my abilities as a 9-year-old boy that I could maybe help raise money for them to be able to dig wells or build rainwater collection stuff? He thought, I'm 9. I can't do a lot, but I can shoot basketball pretty well. And so he went around to all of his neighbors saying, hey, on this Saturday, I'm going to go and I'm going to shoot a whole bunch of baskets. Will you give me some money for every basket that I make? Because here's what it's going to go for. And that charity has continued on for years and years and years, and so many different people have access to fresh, clean, drinkable water because a 9-year-old boy thought, what can I do with the gift that God has given me? I was at a National Youth Workers Convention, and there was a group of people there who, I don't understand how this works because I'm 37 and I'm too old for this now, I think. But their whole purpose is they wanted to reach people, as many people as they possibly could, from all over the corners of the world with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And they thought the best possible way that they could do that was to build relationships and friendships by playing video games with people online. That they would get to talk to, that they would get an opportunity to reach them with the gospel of Jesus Christ in places that they otherwise probably couldn't. And all over the world, there are people coming to know the Lord and Savior of Jesus Christ because 2 guys said, you know what, we're not very good at a lot, but we're really good at playing video games. Whatever your gift is, whatever ability it is that God has given you, it is meant to be used in service to Him. The best possible way that you can use it. Yeah, you have that choice. You can say, nope, this is mine. I'm going to do with it what I want to do. But can I tell you, you're shortchanging yourself? Because when we give those gifts and those abilities to God, God does incredible things with them. Through us, the kingdom of God can be advanced when we give our gifts over to God. Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you. It is a bit of a sacrifice. It's going to cost you time. It's going to cost you effort. It may cost you money. I don't know. But can I tell you, I don't think anybody regrets giving their gift to God, including Hannah. You know how I know this? Because the very next words out of her mouth we see in 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 1. It says, Hannah prayed, "My heart rejoices in the Lord. My horn is lifted up by the Lord. My mouth boasts over my enemies because I rejoice in your salvation." This doesn't sound like a woman who's having second thoughts to me. This doesn't sound like a woman who's regretting giving her son back in service to God. Taking this beautiful gift that God has given her and giving it in service to him. It doesn't sound like she's too upset by that. Because she knows and she trusts that when she gave this gift to God, God would do incredible things with it. I don't know how long Hannah lived for, but we're going to talk about some of the incredible things that her son did after this. And I can't help but think that Hannah would be nothing but a proud mom, watching as this incredible gift of God that she gave back in service to God did unbelievable things. God has blessed you in different ways. He has given you gifts that he's not given others. You have gifts available to you that I don't have. The best way you can use that gift is in service to God. I urge you, find some way to give your gift back to him. Find a ministry to be involved with that suits your gift, whatever that gift may be. If you can't find one on your own, ask. Believe it or not, there may be a ministry available that your gift is perfect for. Yeah, you may not be great at working with teenagers, but maybe you're great somewhere else, and we could probably help you find that out. I would love to help you find a ministry for that spot. If that ministry doesn't exist, if there's not a ministry available that your gift matches, make one. Because God can do incredible things when we choose to give him that gift back. Paul reminds us in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 4 through 6, and we're going to close with it today. He says, "Now there are different gifts, but the same Spirit. There are different ministries, but the same Lord. And there are different activities, but the same God works all of them in each person."